The 62nd gate, preponderance of the small. In the language of the I Ching, the small always refers to detail. You have the taming power of the small, the 9. And here the preponderance of the small, the 62, and they're both part of the same logical circuitry. The 62 is a throat gate, and as a throat gate it has a voice. It says I think or I don't think. It is a voice that is reasonable or unreasonable. It is the mental expression and verbal expression of logic. It is a metamorphic gate. That is, it transforms the visual opinion of the 17 into language. And as such, like the 23, like the 56, these are gates of language, and the 62nd gate is the gate of naming things. It is the gate of names. All names come from the 62nd gate. It says above the line, caution, patience, and detail produce excellence out of limitation. Caution. It is not a motor. There is nothing to do with logical expression. Patience. Logic must be established patiently. It's not emotional. Step by step. And detail. Each aspect of the process has to be available for description. The 62 is opposite the 61 in the wheel. We have the right angle cross of Maya. And in the right angle cross of Maya, you have the 62 and the 61, inner truth, and you have the 42 and the 32. This first line of the 62 is directly opposite occult knowledge in the 61.1. So the foundation of what detail is, and the foundation of detail is routine. And of course, we have Neptune exalted, which tells us that detail can be fuzzy. It can also be profoundly mystical and creative. And that the first business of detail is the ability to transcend the boredom of routine through a rich and daring fantasy life. You know, when many people think about the 62nd gate, they see an accountant somewhere. You know, the cosmic accountant. You know, they're doing all the numbers and, they're checking all the detail and they're doing all the papers. That's not what it's about. Yes, that's a part of it, yes. But that's not what it's about. It's about detail for life itself. It's about being able to detail the pattern of life itself. Whether that is describing the way in which a cell operates, or in the way the muscles move on the body when it's running, as much as it has to do with figuring out your monthly accounts. In other words, don't limit this. And fantasy is essential for this. You see, logic is about being able to prove a theory experimentally. And yet the throat cannot do that. What the throat can do is imagine and describe, in that sense, its imagination of how that experiment could take place. And in order to do that, fantasy is an enormous tool. It's also deeply creative. It is this ability to fantasize that gives understanding its acceptability. That is, we have all had teachers that bore us to death. I mean, all of us have gone through schools where we had teachers that just bored us to death. And we had those that had some kind of flair, had some kind of fantasy. It is very difficult to translate and to offer to others understanding, logic, and make it as interesting as somebody telling stories and belief systems and all the other things. We all know how difficult it is to make basic mathematics exciting. It just is. So fantasy is very important for enriching the way in which understanding is expressed. So it's not just this bland, logical structure. Mars and detriment, rebellion, and its enormous waste of energy. One side is the ability to organize the detail through fantasy, and the other side is the need for expression which ignores the details. 1762s, as an example. If that's cut off so that you have a verbal gunslinger, often they can bring out partial detail in that detriment. Now, of course, like anything else, that's not about good or bad. Sometimes it's absolutely essential just to get the understanding out without having to get into all the detail. But of course, when somebody is dealing with logic, they expect to have all of the aspects. The second line. These are people that don't know that they have a gift for the detail. They don't know that. The innate restrictiveness and discipline to comply with and exalt restraint. They have the discipline necessary for detail work, but it doesn't mean they ever do detail work in their life. If you ask them if they notice something, they're great. They'll tell you right away. But they're not going to tell you. They're not going to work with it. They're not even going to pay attention to the thing that you're asking them the detail for. It's just that they took it in, that the detail is there. The discipline necessary, they're great. What they really end up being is order freaks. If you go into the environment of a 62, everything has order. There has to be a place for things. Now, that does not mean it looks neat to you. It can be absolute chaos, but they know exactly where everything is in the chaos. Or it can be obsessively orderly, and they know exactly where that is. Everything has its place, everything. So that person who is a 62-2 on their own, they're living in this very ordered, detailed environment. Their space is detailed. But in order to get advantage of their collective gift, their ability to be able to describe logically, you have to knock on the door, you have to distract them. These are children that can really be encouraged for study as a general thing. Because once you open up the door for them, they have this incredible discipline for the detail. Mercury in detriment, the intellect stymied by severe restraints tends to anxiety and restlessness. That is the expression of anxiety and restlessness when faced with detail work. These are people who have a natural detail in their lives, but when you call them out and ask them for their detail, they're uncomfortable. Leave me alone. So many second lines, they say, leave me alone. I have that in its, I have the 40th gate, which is the gate of aloneness with the second line. It really tells you, leave me alone. And of course, it's a projection. It doesn't mean that's true or not. You got to take your chances. But the reality is that all second lines are basically saying, I don't really know there's anything out there, so I don't care. I'm not concerned about it. It's not like the third line. Third line keeps bumping into things, so it knows there's something there. It may be blind about what it is, but it knows from the experience of banging into it that there is something there, and it better figure out something about it. Through the third line is the only opportunity for the lower trigram to begin to recognize the importance of the other. The nature of how we're structured. It is our evolution to be separate in this illusion. And that the lower trigram establishes that separateness. It just does. But by the time you get at the end of the lower trigram in the third line, you get that first opportunity That to be separate doesn't mean you're alone, and to be separate doesn't mean that there isn't the other, and that the other can be of value to you. That though you have your personal destiny, that you cannot live it out without recognizing and meeting the other along your way. But it's only in the upper trigram that there really is this evolution towards being open to each other and finding our connection to each other. So that by the time we get to the 6th line phase, when we finally have the opening up of our complete awareness process, perhaps we get to a point that more than just being this kind of aura, which is operating from the mental plane structure, that you end up being deeply connected in a way that we can't understand. In other words, we have this evolutionary growth, and it's also in the structure of the hexagram. So we come to the 3rd line, and when we come to the 3rd line, we come to a classic 3rd line to help all those who suffer from 3rd line inferiorities. Oh, I'm a mistake person. Discovery. Uranus exalted. A genius for the unusual. The ability to discover valuable information in detail work and to find innovative applications for this knowledge. From the moment you come into the world. It's one of the 6 lines of genius. The unusual gift for finding and expressing valuable details. Now, of course, the way that works is that they keep on bumping into things. That is, they keep on finding out that what they thought was the detail is wrong. And what is wonderful about 62 threes is that they don't mind making a mistake. That is, they don't like making a mistake, but they don't mind making a mistake. And it's so important for them because it is out of mistakes, like Pasteur, out of mistakes comes discovery. So there's great genius in this. When you look at each of the lines, because we deal with duality, you can see them positively and negatively. Each one has both their blessing and their curse. It's the way it's supposed to be. The unaware 3rd line really does suffer a great deal in life because they bang into things and they get hurt and they feel insecure because their certainty gets snapped. At the same level, they can discover things nobody else can. And what they discover can be of enormous value to society. The detriment. Venus. A dissatisfaction with the monotony of detail, where what is missed may be of great importance and value. The expression of dissatisfaction and boredom in detail work. The 3rd line gets its detail together, does all its work, bangs into somebody and finds that it's all just so much thin air. And it really becomes such a boring thing to have to do that all over again. I mean, it's just a pain to have to do that all over again. I get that every once in a while when I do a reading and the tape doesn't work. And it's a horror for me. I mean, it's terrible. And that's a 62 thing right along the track. It's just a horrible thing. You got to do it all again, and you've done it already. And even if you've done it already and it's right, and it's ugly or whatever, and you got to fix it and whatever, it's very hard for the 62-3, that detriment, to have to go through the process again and go through the detail again. Right? The other thing is that when they have to repeat it, they feel like they're losing something and missing something. I do the first reading and that's my reward. I do it, I get paid for it, that's my job. But when it's messed up and I have to do it again, then I'm taking that time again for nothing when I could have been doing something else. That's the logic inherent in that. Eh? Well, I got to do it again now, and I could be doing this, and I could be doing that, and I could be doing this. Maya. Don't forget, this is the cross of Maya. And as the cross of Maya, these gates, the 62, 61, 42, 32, They really represent our opportunity to embrace the mechanical world. To really be able to step into it and recognize it, just as the 60-second gate has given the name to all of the things that we recognize as our world. In the beginning was the Word, and it came out of the 60-second gate. Personal destiny. First 3 lines. Personal. Their own detail. Personal. And when you get to the transpersonal, when you get to the upper trigram and you get to the 4th line, you get to this line of asceticism. Venus exalted, the perfected ascetic withdrawal in the pursuit of harmony and simplicity where outside dangers do not exist and there is time to pursue inner meaning in detail. Detail that can only be expressed after periods of isolation and reflection. It is interesting to note that the first thing that happens when detail is transpersonal is that there is a restriction on how much detail you give out and when. So one of the things you'll discover is that lower trigrams express themselves more often than upper trigrams. They're just not as clear. And it's often coming out at timings that are not their own because they don't know what's on the other side. And the moment that you get to, this is, after all, it's a detail gate. You have to be able to work out the detail. This is not about just saying to people, blah, 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 blah. This 4th line is saying, wait a minute. If I'm responsible for externalizing detail to the other, I better be clear about what that detail actually is. Ascetic withdrawal. Pluto in detriment, the urge to take action against established values that when restrained by circumstances leads to withdrawal that waits for opportunity. Where the detail is organized, isolation is a strategy waiting for the right opportunity for expression. This is all about the nature of 4th lines anyway. Remember, the opportunist. What is the sweetness and the sour of the opportunist? The sweetness is that the opportunist always gets their opportunity. That's the sweetness. Always. The sour is that the opportunist has to wait with what it has, old lover, old job, old friend, until that moment that it can make the leap and take the opportunity of a new friend, new job, new lover. The sweet and the sour. So this ascetic withdrawal is about opportunity. You withdraw to do your detail work, and then you wait for that opportunity. And at the moment that that opportunity is there, in the exalted, the opportunity is a selection. In the detriment, the opportunity is simply a strategy. Withdrawing and waiting for that right moment to be able to get across the detail. At the end of the 4th line, in the last 7 minutes and 30 seconds, we have this transition to the 4-1 profile, to the juxtaposition cross. And the 42-32 is replaced with the 3 and the 50. So we have 62, 61, 3, and 50. And this is the juxtaposition cross of detail. And of course, given the nature of this line, these are very reclusive people. They're very much involved in their life in collecting the detail and often at the expense of ever delivering it. In other words, often for them the detail work is never done. Never done. It's just an ongoing process. They're often diarists. The kind of people that keep daily diaries and, they are always noting down the detail of things. That is their fixed process. My assumption is that they're very important now in our scientific evolution because so much of what we do has to do with detail crunching. The 5th line and 6th line, you have the left angle cross, and this is the left angle cross of obscuration. Interesting name. To make things obscure or to reveal the obscure. The 5th line is called metamorphosis. There are several lines you will discover that are called metamorphoses. We saw one already in the 12th hexagram, the 6th line. And metamorphosis is always an indication of a highly mutative gate. That is a gate that is always open to radical change. When excellence is achieved, action is necessary. In this case, excellence is the completion of the detail work. You know, it's the rule of the teacher. You have to know 10 times more than your students know. Otherwise, you have no right to teach them. Your detail has to be complete. In logic, we know because of the nature of logic and movement that we must always continue our process of checking the detail over and over again. But cycles of knowledge and cycles of learning come to a close. And it's when you have that detail, that's when you can give and relate understanding reasonably to others. The moon exalted, reaching out to others to share, collective gate, symbolized by the moon's phases. This goes back again to the general. Please remember that. The moon's phases as it moves from darkness to eventually sharing its light. The cross of obscuration. So what happens with the 5 is that you have a sector of our society that's operating on trying to figure out the detail of something. You know, they're doing research or whatever the case may be. And off in the wilderness on the farm is this being, this 5th line that's been doing the detail by themselves, within themselves, in isolation. And they go from that no moon phase where nobody gets access to their light, where nobody gets access to their detail, until finally they reach the full moon phase, and at that moment the detail is ready to go out into the world and to be accepted. And like the general, they come out of nowhere to bring the solution, the practical solution necessary in terms of what the detail is. Neptune in detriment, a tendency in metamorphosis to seek acclaim through dramatic presentation. Eureka! I have found the cure for AIDS, cancers, and hemorrhoids. All in one bottle. Well, that goes on all the time. Wasn't there this whole thing with this, this fusion machine that was going to give us all this fusion energy, that they had figured out how to do cold fusion, and all those scientists were making a classic 62.5. Out of nowhere, suddenly they announce that cold fusion works and they got it, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it turned out to be nonsense. It is so important to realize that whenever logic is expressed, it then has to be experimented with before you can accept it. And that's the great truth of logic. It's meaningless until you've worked it through, experimented with it, and recognized its inherent truth. And by going through the experimentation, you will find the illogic, if it is there. You will find what does not work. Logic is not there to accept things at face value. When the details are organized, the need for attention demands expression. And of course, it's very important to realize that because the 60-second gate names things, details things, that they automatically want to be recognized. I mean, it's just automatic. I'm a 62. I have put all these words into the language. Personality crystal and design crystal and all of this stuff. This is just the naming of things. Left angle cross and right angle cross. This is just where names come from. It comes out of this detailing. So there is a natural need for recognition, because otherwise the name cannot be accepted by the collective. Unless everybody knows that that thing that jumps out of the ground and looks like it's going towards the sky is called a tree, then we cannot really communicate to each other about that nature. So the moment that there is a name, there has to be a way to get the name out into the world, otherwise the name dies. That's why the 5th line, the universalizing line, can create out of itself that metamorphosis. I mean, the classic example of the New Age is Osho, who went around giving everybody a name. He's a 62. He just gave people names. The 6th line. The 60-second gate, because it's such an important gate, that is, it opens up the possibility for us to have a common understanding. It is the way to express our common understanding. That until the detail is really there, that need to express, I think, and what I don't think, is very powerful. As children, they get burnt early, this 6th line of the 62. They see the detail. They see what's missed. Whenever I talk about 6 lines, you'll notice that I always bring you back to the childhood perspective, because that's where the 6th line gets its experience. In other words, the 6th line plays out the 3rd line role until it's around 18 years old or so. As late as 25, but that's really late to still be in that. Most of them are out of it by the end of their teenage years. Because when you get burnt at that age, it really hurts you. So you come up with a detail, and the detail is wrong, and you get smashed for your detail. You get abused for being unreasonable. Now, in my using of that language, please understand something. The 1762 and the 1858, these are both forces that are deeply critical in their nature, because that's what logic demands. The 1762, the 62 in particular, can express argumentation because that's its nature. Logic is always asking to be argued with. Always. And if you see that without attaching a reason, that the argument is not personal, but it's about the collective information. It's not personal. Jesus, if people can grasp that, life would be so much easier. It's just about logically working out, is this correct or not? Is the detail correct or not? If you say 1 and 1 is 3, and it is shown to you that 1 and 1 is 2, you cannot take that personally. You cannot be emotional about that. Well, I like it being 3. It isn't going to do any good. And the moment that we stop taking those 2 channels personally, there's a lot more peace in the collective, because they're essential ingredients. We need to accept that logic must be challenged. We need to accept that every time you say, I think, someone has a right to say, I don't think you know what you're talking about. And that it's not personal, even though you want to punch them. You have to ask them, why not? And point by point by point, you work out the logic until you get to a point where you have to be reasonable, where one of you says, oh, now I get it. That's all. And that's the beauty of logic. It's collective. It's social. So it's one of those things to see is that when somebody has the detail, they want to share that with you. And it's very important that your contribution logically is to challenge it if the detail isn't right. So self-discipline in the 6th line. It's a funny 6th line. It's Saturn exalted. It says a penny saved is a penny earned. The understanding that material success depends on the expression of detail. Now, this is something very magical, because when logic gets to the point of being the sage, the fool on the hill, it looks around and it says, the only thing that logic is good for is to make sure that we can stay alive. Make sure that we have enough resources. Sounds very tribal. Make sure that we can get what we need. That is detail resulting in success. The other thing is at the metaphoric level. At the metaphoric level is that the more detail you accumulate, that you're clear about, the more advantages you have in life in being able to get your experiment fulfilled. That understanding makes us rich. And that's very important. The more we understand, the richer we get. It is clear to me I have great respect for logic. I'm a pure individual in my design. I have a lot of logical gates, though. And without these logical gates, I never, ever would have been able to share with you the understanding of what was put through me. I would not have had the language for it. Logic, to bring things to a formula. It's so important in our lives. So when you understand, you are wealthy. Because when you understand, you can live out your nature. And when you live out your nature, you get the resources that are correct for you. Which means that if you live out your nature and you starve to death, that's correct. There's a lot of innocent beings living out their nature in this moment who are dying this moment of starvation. And they are not dying with damaged spirits, no matter how mushy we want to get about their passing. There's 40,000 babies die every hour. They are innocent. They are innocent. And their spirit remains innocent. They are living out their nature. There is nothing to be done about that. This is not about the morality of life. It is about the acceptance that if you live out your nature, your spirit remains pure. It doesn't matter whether you are a physical success or not. I doubt very much if Bill Gates lived out his nature, if he ever would have become the richest man on the planet. And if I said to him, look, Bill, you could have been yourself or you could be this rich guy, you know. Being yourself doesn't mean that you're going to be a financial success in life. It doesn't mean that you're going to have success in love in life. It doesn't mean any of that. It means you're going to be you. You see, the totality has to experience everything. It has to experience those that can never know love. It has to experience those that only know love. It has to experience those that are violent and those that are not. It has to have all of that. If all of it operates correctly, it's okay. It's okay. That's the real magic. But we don't. We have a whole planet that's operating out of the not-self. And all of these lines, all of them, are unhealthy the way they come out now. All of them. Mercury in detriment, the skills but not the discipline to succeed. The gift for, but not the discipline to do the necessary detail work to succeed. The logic process is about the ability finally to be able to guide humanity. This is the mind of the Alpha. This is the mind of the leader. This is the mind of the lover of humanity. And for the 62-6, there is always this possibility that if the real understanding isn't available, I'm not going to bother. I'm just not going to bother. The wonderful thing about 62-6s is that they really know who has the understanding. They may not get all the detail because they may not bother. But when they hear the expression, when they hear the reasonableness, remember the logical voice is either reasonable or unreasonable. When they hear the reasonableness of that voice, they can immediately sense whether or not that logic is correct. And they can help guide others. Do you think he really understands? Do you think she really understands? Yes, I do. Carries enormous value. If you look in your designs and you have a 6th line in a gate, it's one of those things for you to see that that is a place for you where there is expertise as a potential in your life. Something that you can really know about. And of course, that's something ultimately that can be both career and socially of value to you. You know, to know where you have that 6th line perspective. It is different when you see it in your profile. If you're somebody, for example, that is a 3-6, you're somebody who has an unconscious 6-line design or personality. That means that your unconscious gets burnt out early. And that it really doesn't want to commit itself to things in life as a general theme until it can really find something of value according to whatever its gate and lines are. And that if you have a 6-line personality, if you're a 6-2 or a 6-3, with that 6-line personality, your personality jumps into things early, gets burned, and then your personality doesn't necessarily engage anymore. That this is a personality that gets more and more aloof, avoiding making commitments. Yet at the same time, that 6th-line unconscious or personality has within it that potential to be able to see from that perspective. And that the uncomfortable experiences in the 3rd-line phase early in the life are absolutely essential and not to be avoided. Otherwise, there's no experience to work from. That 62, this detail and its expression, it leads for me, magically, it leads to the 56 gate, which does exactly the same job on the abstract side.